In this lecture, we will study the receptors and neurotransmitters of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. In the previous lecture, we have studied the divisions of nervous system, including some of the characteristics of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And hope you remember this diagram which we have studied over there, consisting of the neurons in sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And we have studied that in both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, the neurons originate from the central nervous system and extend to the peripheral organs in your body through a two-neuron chain. So in the sympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic neuron is short and the postganglionic neuron is longer. And in the parasympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic neuron is longer and postganglionic neuron is shorter. Now, we will study this in detail using this diagrammatic representation. So, this is the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and the neurons in both systems originate from the central nervous system to your peripheral organs through a two-neuron chain, and the neuron coming before the synapse or the neuron originating from the central nervous system is known as the presynaptic neuron or preganglionic neuron, and the neuron after the synapse is known as postsynaptic neuron or postganglionic neuron. Similarly, in the parasympathetic nervous system, you can see that the neurons originate from the central nervous system and extend to the peripheral organs through a two-neuron chain. So this is the presynaptic neuron or preganglionic neuron, and this is the postsynaptic neuron or postganglionic neuron. As we studied before, the neurons in sympathetic nervous system arise from the thoracic region and lumbar region of the central nervous system and extend to the peripheral organs in your body. And the neurons in parasympathetic nervous system arise from the cranial and the sacral region of the spinal cord, consisting of the cranial nerves and the sacral nerves. Now we will study the receptors and neurotransmitters located on the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. In both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, when an information is received to the central nervous system, the central nervous system integrates the information received and gives a response by triggering the presynaptic neuron. So, as a result, the presynaptic neuron releases a neurotransmitter which binds to the receptor on the postsynaptic neuron. And the binding of this neurotransmitter to this receptor leads to the release of another neurotransmitter. And the released neurotransmitter again binds to the receptor on our target organs or on our peripheral organs, finally giving the response in our body. Similarly, in the case of parasympathetic nervous system. So now let us see the receptors and neurotransmitters located on the sympathetic nervous system. In the sympathetic nervous system, the neurotransmitter released in presynaptic neuron is acetylcholine, and the neurotransmitter released in the postsynaptic neuron is adrenaline or noradrenaline. And in the parasympathetic nervous system, the neurotransmitter released in the presynaptic neuron is acetylcholine, and the neurotransmitter released in postsynaptic neuron is also acetylcholine. So you can see the neurotransmitter released at the preganglionic neuron of both sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system is acetylcholine, and the postsynaptic neuron of parasympathetic nervous system is also acetylcholine. But the neurotransmitter released in the postsynaptic neuron of sympathetic nervous system is adrenaline or noradrenaline. Since these neurons release acetylcholine as neurotransmitter, these neurons are said to be cholinergic. And since the postsynaptic neuron of sympathetic nervous system release adrenaline or noradrenaline as the neurotransmitter, the neuron is said to be adrenergic. Now let us study the receptors of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. As we said before, this released neurotransmitter has to bind to a receptor on the postsynaptic neuron. So, the receptor on the postsynaptic neuron or the receptor on the postganglionic neuron of both sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system is nicotinic. That means in the sympathetic nervous system, the released acetylcholine binds to nicotinic receptor, and also in the parasympathetic nervous system, the released acetylcholine binds to the nicotinic receptor. Now, there are also receptors located on your peripheral organs. The receptor located on your peripheral organ, if receiving signal from the sympathetic nervous system, is known as adrenergic receptor. Or the receptor on your peripheral organs, if receiving adrenaline or noradrenaline as the neurotransmitter, then the receptor is said to be adrenergic. And the receptor of parasympathetic nervous system located on your peripheral organ is muscarinic. Or if your peripheral organ receive acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter, then the receptor is muscarinic. So now the concept may be clear to you that in the sympathetic nervous system, when an information is received to the central nervous system, it integrates the information and trigger the presynaptic neuron to release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, and the released neurotransmitter binds to the nicotinic receptor on the postsynaptic neuron or postganglionic neuron, which again trigger the postganglionic neuron to release another neurotransmitter adrenaline or noradrenaline, which binds to the receptor, and finally showing the actions in your body. And in the case of parasympathetic nervous system, when an information is received to the central nervous system, it integrates the information and gives a response by triggering the presynaptic neuron to release acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter, and this released acetylcholine binds to the nicotinic receptor on the postsynaptic neuron or postganglionic neuron, which again trigger the neuron to release another neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which binds to the muscarinic receptor, showing the actions of the peripheral organs on your body. So this is what happens in your body through the neurons and receptors in your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. In the somatic nervous system, the neurons extend from the central nervous system to our involuntary organ, that is skeletal muscle, through a single neuron chain. And in the nerve terminal, the neurotransmitter acetylcholine is released. and the released acetylcholine binds to the nicotinic receptor located on the skeletal muscles, which finally helps in the movement of skeletal muscles. And the area between this neuron and muscle is known as N-M junction or neuromuscular junction. And the receptor located here is now also known as N-M receptor. When adrenaline or noradrenaline binds to our peripheral organs, it results in stimulatory action on our organs. And when acetylcholine binds to the receptor on our organs, it results in inhibitory action on our organs. Or we can also say that our organs, when innervated by sympathetic nervous system, has excitatory actions, and the organs, when innervated by parasympathetic nervous system, has inhibitory actions. For example, in case of heart, if heart is innervated by neurons in sympathetic nervous system, or the neurotransmitters adrenaline or noradrenaline is released into the heart, then it will have increased heartbeat, which is an excitatory action. And when the heart is innervated by the neurons in parasympathetic nervous system, or if acetylcholine binds to the receptors on our heart, will result in decreased heartbeat. So, most of our organs are innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and their actions usually oppose each other, which maintain the homeostatic balance in our body, which is known as the dual innervation. That is, as we said before, as in the case of heart, sympathetic innervation leads to increased heartbeat and parasympathetic nervous system leads to decreased heartbeat. The adrenergic and muscarinic receptors can be either inhibitory or excitatory, since they are G-protein coupled receptors. And the nicotinic receptors in the somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system are always excitatory, as they are ligand-gated ion channels. So most of our organs are innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. There are some exceptions to this dual innervation. That is, some of our organs receive only sympathetic innervations, and we will study those in detail in the next lecture. Also remember these terms which are commonly used here. The organs which are receiving information from the neuron are also known as effector organs, and the neurotransmitter located between the neurons and the effector organ is also known as neuroeffector transmitter. And the neurotransmitter released between two neurons is also known as ganglionic transmitter.